the movement sees sort of civilization as a life form, and the goal is to increase its scope and scale. And to us, acceleration is a constant optimization process of every parameter, whether it's technology, culture, ways to govern ourselves, even genetics. Everything should be constantly optimizing itself to maximize growth of civilization, because we are a very rare state of matter. Life in our corner of the universe is very rare, and we should preserve it. And to preserve it, we need to grow. And so it is a maximalist sort of pro-growth movement. And to me, that is acceleration. It is constant dynamism, constantly exploring, constantly undergoing sort of creative destruction. And that's what we advocate for as sort of the ultimate form of emergent goods. So we advocate for free markets, for open source, open collaboration and sharing of information, maybe not so much centralization of governance and control and power, because our thesis is that that's not fault tolerant to corruption. So on average, it leads to, on a sufficient time scale, sort of the downfall of civilization. And so we are definitely, pro AI progress. We believe that intelligence is a fundamental technology that allows us to scale civilization to the stars, and slowing it down, there's a massive upside we're leaving on the table, and we should discuss sort of the opportunity cost of kind of this modern obsession with safetyism. And so that's roughly a summary of it.
So what gives the other side, the decelerationist view? What does it mean?
I mean, technically deceleration would just be reduction of speed, which is not to say stop, right? I'm not on the side of deceleration. I think that either maximalist approach or full deceleration, full acceleration is kind of not commensurate to the moment that we find ourselves in, which is arguably one of as important or more so than the industrial or agricultural revolution with the upcoming cognitive revolution. And I think that taking it as a full maximalist approach, we're missing a lot of nuance, and obviously it's a more nuanced problem that we need to deal with. And I think that even if I was to take the acceleration of the whole civilization stance, then I think it requires looking at all kind of factors that make up civilization, all parts of civilization, rather than only technology, right? Sometimes you talk about the homo techno capital mimetic machine, but there's also the economy, the ecology. There is also government, which plays some role, right? It's non-zero, and you are in favor of some government things. And I think that we want to go as civilization at the speed with which we can kind of integrate the technological change into the other facets of life.
Right, and it doesn't sound, when you talk about this, it doesn't sound like, you're too far apart. There are some similarities here, which is, I think kind of surprising when you think about some of the discourse on Twitter and on X and other places. I wanted to just skip ahead, because this debate is really about sort of how we get there, but I thought it might be helpful to start off with, let's skip ahead to when we get there. What is your vision? What are your visions for, the AI-enabled world that we're sort of heading toward? I think you both believe we're heading toward. Why don't you start, Guillaume?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a slight panic these days. People think that jobs are finite and that AI is taking away our jobs, but really it's giving us sort of intellectual leverage with these sort of LLMs right now for white collar work. Embodied intelligence or robotics is going to give us sort of operational leverage in the physical world. We're just going to do more, right? It's kind of counterintuitive that sometimes when something gets cheaper, it's not like jobs are lost. You just do far more given the amount of money, capital, human capital, energy we have. So really the future that's AI enabled, we're just going to do far more. We're going to tackle much greater challenges taking control of our planet, our climate, really having better control of that, terraforming Mars and so on, having compute clusters around the sun, capturing the sun's energy to power our AI, to put less stress on planet Earth, really being able to master and control chemistry, biology, and really I think in the future we're all going to be augmented in potentially not even an invasive way, with AI that is personalized, that is catered to us, that is an extension of our cognition, that perceives everything we perceive and suggests our action, and is a personalized sort of model and computer that evolves with you throughout your life. And to me, that's kind of the ideal vision of the future, but that's only possible if we keep AI open and if everybody has the right to have access to their own AI compute, their own models. Because if we legislate away that ability and it's only centralized players that have one model to rule them all, then we become a Borg-like intelligence, and that intelligence can be subverted behind the scenes and steered in shadowy ways, and that's sort of the future we want to avoid. So.
Gil, what?
Yeah, I think it touches on kind of a little bit on the false dichotomy that acceleration versus deceleration is. I don't think that we're either centralized in a Borg way through one AI that rules everybody. Like, we have separation of powers, right? Like, the US Constitution enshrined that, where it was worried about the potential danger of like over-centralization, and then we chose to have a separation of powers, which is in fact much more decentralized than an environment where you have Facebook run everything. Like, that doesn't seem very decentralized and a great future that I want. It's like letting the free market run totally free, to the degree such that you have monopolies because you have network effects, you have barriers to entry, you have economies of scale. Like, it's not the case that a free market naturally always allows decentralization. You have to like help it a little bit, and that's why you're probably also in favor of antitrust laws, I would imagine, right? But for that, you need some government and you need like some centralization. Like, again, like, we're painting this as if it's like max centralization versus max decentralization, but in reality, the answer is like somewhere, not even in the middle. It's like, I also want society, relatively speaking, to where we are now, to move closer to decentralization, reduce the size of government, and accelerate many, many areas of life. But that's a different thing than to say that because I held the general directional belief, I will take this as an absolutist belief to the very end. And I want to split that a little bit. But in the end, the future that we want is the same one, I think. Like the one you describe, where AI helps us build whatever we want to build, like the world becomes more malleable, we become healthier, more able to live, can like experience all sorts of like mind states that we otherwise couldn't. That's amazing. Obviously, we want that.
And but I'm picking up on this comment out, like one of the big risks that I think it sounds like you both agree on is this centralization of power. That's really, which is another, I don't know, I think you guys were expecting a fight or something, but I
would say Igor is
something.
relatively moderate. I would say he's closer to the center of the spectrum. There are more extreme decelerationist like Yudkowsky that, say stop AI development.
I mean, there are
the data centers.
There are people on every side of any issue.
Yeah. So I would say I'm like more diametrically opposite to Yudkowsky, and you're closer to the center, and so it's probably not going to be like perfect dichotomy in this discussion, but maybe that's more interesting because at the end of the day, what I saw online was that there was a monoculture in Silicon Valley. It was all about AI safety. It was all, and if that was the only culture that was going to influence policy, that was going to be our policy, right? And I thought we would leave a lot on the table, so I started the counter movement to that to bring balance. Of course, like, ultimately, politicians will take a mixture model of the modes of opinions and land somewhere in the center. I think Igor lands somewhere in the center, and I agree. Some governance is important. Some laws have to be there. I talked to Lena Khan, for example, of the FTC, and she was very, receptive to our concerns with EAC. Our concerns there was that the big players were trying to, leverage this sort of AI safety movement to achieve regulatory capture and sort of monopolize AI, right? Which we don't want, right? So I would agree with Igor that we need some governance there to avoid. Well, if the market was truly free and there was no regulatory capture, perhaps there wouldn't be so much centralization. But I think we want the same things.
I mean, maybe you both could give me. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead with your
question. What's your view for what is the regulation that you both think we need? We just had SB 1047 vetoed in California. That just became this lightning rod, I think, for this debate, really. But what is the perfect? I think in your mind, like, if we could do anything, maybe you could just quickly kind of summarize what is the perfect regulation that would sort of allow this future that I think you both want, but safely and without,
Yeah, I mean, we don't know yet. Obviously, we don't, because the technology is changing, and the things we would now think are like the primary part to regulate, we just have been shot in a completely wrong direction down the line, and they might have. Anyway, so technology is changing, right? But the thing that we also don't want, I think, is for like OpenAI only or Sam Altman to sit like in the driver's seat of all of the decisions of when like something that has national security or like very far-reaching societal implications to be the one potentially that decides like how that is going to then reform society. So the thing that I feel confident, what do you do in a state when you don't know about which regulation to do? You try to find out. So like we would ideally have stuff that allows for more transparency, that allows for communication and inside views, for communication from the labs to government, because in the end, like government or not, and obviously government does many bad things, but it also works as an effective referee in some areas. And if you don't have the government act on things, then you end up with things as we've seen with big oil, big tobacco, like asbestos was known to be destructive and still the companies hid it. And it wasn't a situation where multiple companies that provide asbestos or multiple companies that provide tobacco or PFAS chemicals, because of that there is like some safer like alternative always coming out. No, they have the same incentive to conceal the truth. And the same, I think, is to be expected from big tech.
But one of the big, sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, one of the big, I think, things that I hear from a lot of AI safety advocates is that this is different. This is not, AI is not like these other things that we've had to regulate in the past.
Of course, the technology, as we both believe, right, like is of a different scale than other technologies of the last 100 years. It'll lead to bigger change. The thing I'm pointing at is more that from the patterns of how do companies and where work within their incentive systems are the ones that I would expect to continuously still be the case for big tech as they were for big tobacco and many other of these examples. Like 3M recently got fined $10 billion for knowingly distributing, continuing to use their products, even though they knew that it leaks PFAS chemicals all over the place. And what do? They just hide it and sweep it under the rug. And one more thing, I think the narrative that the big labs were using AI safety to create regulatory capture will be true at times, but sometimes it is not the reason for regulation. And in particular, some forms of regulation that are aimed at specifically the frontier labs, this is the one that I would want to see, and I think it's a fair debate to have whether SB 1047 achieved that or not. But if that's the goal and one achieves that, then that is by definition not regulatory capture. You're looking at the big players and making them kind of have a harder time to prove their safety standards, right?
Yeah, to me, first of all, if the government has contact with only a certain set of companies, those companies will inadvertently get to shape the regulations that get written into law. And if there's only a few players at the table, they will skew the laws to their advantage, right? So a classic form of regulatory capture is just add a bunch of compliance, add a bunch of red tape, and then the startups can't fund the headcount they need to comply, right? And then that's massive regulatory risk hanging over their heads. It suppresses investment into the sector, and then it suppresses, it kills the amount of innovation in the sector, right?
I mean, I agree with the theory, but that's not what even SB 1047, as faulty as it in part was, aimed to do, and it had the 100 million.
It wasn't the aim, but it was a byproduct that was going to add
10 to the 26 flops and 100 million minimum. That's not a small startup that can't afford.
No, but for example, it wasn't clear if you fine-tune a llama model, where you would be on that spectrum, right? I think basically
they added that actually.
Well, those being debated, but the point that it wasn't so clear and the language was very blurry and
but I would agree actually that the language was still vague. So you would then be in favor potentially if it was less vague and actually able to hit that goal of specifically aiming at the frontier labs rather than also slowing down or putting difficulties for startups.
I think any regulation that would affect the open source community, open source models, fine tuning, and so on would be massively detrimental to innovation. I don't think we should ban big labs from open sourcing their models, right? I think it brings sort of the playing field up, and it helps a lot of startups that wouldn't be able to afford to train their own models. And
do you see exceptions? Like, for example, with a model that will, like right now, OpenAI and the release of the O1 model added to their system card that it had medium CBRN risk, which in their case meant that it was differentially helping an expert to find out how to create and distribute a pandemic potential pathogen, where it was about the differential improvement relative to Googling or anything else. So like the next stage is at some point, maybe, I'm not saying it will be, but like will probably actually at some point happen where even someone that is not an expert, but with like just a standard PhD or an undergrad can potentially access that information. Would you want that information to not be accessible to everyone?
I think like the pandemic risk argument, there's other bottlenecks like actually having access to the lab and access to the equipment there. You know, there's always like these headlines of like, oh yeah, AI can discover neurotoxins, right? But like many random samples are toxic in the landscape.
Why don't we? Just because in the interest of time, I think there's a part of this debate over regulation that has to do with timelines, and how fast. I mean, how we regulate this kind of depends on how fast you think it's going to move, right? What are your timelines? Like, what do you think? Are we gonna hit some sort of AGI or superintelligence, Guillaume? I mean,
so I think AGI and superintelligence are great marketing terms that have helped raise a lot of money in recent years. I worked on AI for physics for roughly 10 years, so designing matter, designing drugs, understanding the physics of the world, and some of the thesis of the doomers is that AI is going to immediately understand it. Every physical system is going to be able to engineer viruses, right? If our AI was so competent at like bioengineering, like the startups trying to design drugs and throwing billions of dollars at it and struggling right now would be very successful, right? Like,
I mean, literally, we just had Max Jaderberg talk about in silico open-ended research. For sure, you have a speed up, right?
I'm excited about AlphaFold. It has a lot of limitations. I can get into. They don't understand dynamics yet. They don't have access to a simulator because they can't simulate.
Apparently, it can't design a virus. I agree with that. But over time,
it's not clear. I think that nature is highly complex, and the most efficient way to test a thing right now is to literally build it, especially in biotech. It's not. Your neural prior has to come from data, and that data to acquire, it's very costly, and you're bottlenecked by testing in the real world, and you can't just simulate in silico because that just simply doesn't work. And so
I think
the challenge is
intuition has a mistake because it's pointing at the very true. It's very hard to create new research. For that, you have to experiment, go out, try, fail, right? But a lot of the things in biotech engineering, they just have protocols. Like a friend of mine had a few of his students at MIT just follow a protocol to create and work on influenza viruses. And like people that have very little wet lab experience can still do it if they follow a protocol. Like they're familiar with like mammalian tissue.
There's very high biorisk right now without any AI, to be honest. Like anybody that has a PhD and has access to the lab and trying to engineer things, we are under.
Well, in a way, this you're talking now about things that are risks today, right?
So,
but I think, because we already have. I'd love to hear just very quickly what you think about, because a lot of AI safety talks about this existential risk, which implies we're going to get to, some sort of superintelligence that threatens all of humanity. Are we?
I want to debunk like superintelligence. At least to me, I don't believe in this sort of runaway effect of intelligence improving itself. To me, that's just like you're using one system to improve the other. That's just called meta learning. We've been trying to do that for decades, as Pedro Domingos knows. At the end of the day, you're still limited by compute. To engineer viruses, you're limited by compute. You either have a model of the world that is compute heavy and costs you a lot to train, or you have to compute in the physical world, right? So really, there's a sort of bottleneck to gaining knowledge and training the AIs. Once it's trained, of course, it's very impressive, but the things it's trained on right now, we had the data. But there's many things that we don't know, like how to engineer, the ultimate virus or some form of gray goo. It's not even clear it's possible. That it would maybe take billions of years of testing to figure out. And really, life itself, every organism is trying to capture more energy and grow and boom, right? But everything keeps each other in check, right? And so that's what we want for AI. We don't want there to be a singleton AI, just one or two labs that are allowed to do AI. We need a sort of adversarial equilibrium of many players kind of competing for resources, competing for market share. They won't have infinite compute budgets, so they can't find these optima and high dimensional landscapes much better than their adversaries.
So there's a ceiling. Guillaume, I want to just summarize. So Igor, Guillaume believes there's kind of a ceiling here that's sort of, a soft ceiling. Like we cannot, almost impossible to get to this sort of dangerous super intelligence. Do you agree with that?
I want to comment on a couple other things. I think some of these are theoretical arguments which are correct, but getting over-applied and miss the real-world situation. Like, it is true that, some extremely complicated, 180,000 base pair virus engineering is very, very hard. But you don't need that. You can order with a DNA synthesis printing company just a few strands of DNA, and then you can work with other people if you really had the desire to create a virus and then distribute it in multiple places. We currently have, it's not about novel research. We just had Deep Vision, which was fortunately shut down, a project by the US government to collect all pandemic potential pathogens in various places in the world and then rank them by lethality and then publish it broadly. That's like a blueprint. Sometimes in the real world, you have actors make such dumb actions like this, and then the theoretical argument doesn't really help you anymore, because in reality, while we are in adversarial equilibrium is great, but the world is more brittle. A virus can just kill 30% of people, and it has in the past. And when it kills 30% of people, that was 1918, or earlier, but right now, we had such massive effects, compounding effects, due to a very simple virus like COVID. It wasn't even it was terrible, but it wasn't even that bad, and we had total mess from it, because you have these positive feedback loops and you have emergent issues occurring that you don't necessarily predict beforehand. So my point is, just because you have things keeping each other in check, that doesn't allow for humanity to keep existing. Humanity is somewhat brittle, and we need to make sure that we don't fight so hard that it can break in the meantime.
How do you feel about taking some audience questions? If anyone has any, I'm happy to. There's a microphone right there.
I will add just to that point about safetyism, in a sense, biosafetyism, right? Is how we got COVID, right? So
very different people and doesn't apply. It's equivocation just because it's the same word. The people.
Just 1 second. So basically, they're exploring how potential pathogens could become dangerous and experimenting in a lab, and now the dominant theory is that it did leak from a lab. And so if we have all these AI safety labs obsessing over dangerous AI and creating these dangerous AIs and trying to make them maximally dangerous, applying large budgets to create these systems that the free market wouldn't naturally want to do, right? Having a subversive AI that doesn't listen to you and is having its own mind, right? The market would naturally reward an AI that is subservient and a good employee. To me, the selective pressure by the market is towards good AIs, and the selective pressure of safetyism is toward bad AIs.
I think that's the same argument as the selective pressure for 3M was to produce no PFAS chemicals for big tobacco, create cigarettes that don't have any danger to people. It doesn't mean that the market leads there.
Wouldn't have existed without the artificial selective pressure of the safetiest
It wasn't
mindset.
the safetiest. It was people that are doing gain-of-function research.
We're doing gain-of-function research for AI, right? And my point
Correct.
is that's more dangerous than letting the market try to have a product that serves humans, right?
But
humans
it is the
will
game
naturally steer the evolutionary selective pressure of the space of AIs towards AIs that are aligned and useful to us, and that's the thesis.
But right? It is the market that's doing gain-of-function research right now. So if you say that,
no,
then
it's a cult. It's a cult of AI doomerism and safetyism.
Sorry, gain-of-function research is what OpenAI and DeepMind and everybody is doing.
Anthropic and so on.
How is Anthropic doing more gain-of-function than OpenAI?
All the AI doomers are scared of let's get to the questions.
By the way, this gets a bit heated, but in the end, we do want the same thing here.
I wish
we're finding out.
I wish we had infinite time, because it's a fascinating debate.
One question for Guillaume: is it possible for us to be going too quickly, and what would you expect to see if that were true?
I think, so you could think of like our governance, our culture, our technologies, our ways of thinking as sort of constantly drifting and diffusing. You could think of it as like a sort of evolutionary search, and the more variance you encourage, right, the more different ways we're trying to do things across all dimensions, the faster we can adapt. There's just fundamental theorems of information geometry and optimization or evolution that tell us that variance equals speed, right? And so what we want is not a catastrophic failure of the world to disruptive technology. We want to maintain malleability. To be malleable, we need to encourage variance, try a bunch of things, hedge our bets, and be dynamically adaptable. So the most moral thing is to be dynamically adapting to disruption rather than slowing it down and staying static, right? That's what big companies do. They're kind of calcified, they're not as dynamic, and when disruptions come, they try to kill the startups, acquire them, shut them down, kill their suppliers, and so on, suppress them, and then everyone suffers due to that. What we want is to encourage innovation and create a disruption. And so to me, the most moral thing is to let the system adapt and be malleable rather than trying to slow it down and maintain the status quo, because that's when we all suffer. That's when you have inflation and very suboptimal services of all kinds.
What do you need to see today to make you feel like maybe you're wrong?
I'm building processors that are several orders of magnitude more energy efficient and faster than today's AI processors. And I know this is coming for a fact. Whether we succeed or not, there's going to be another company that does it. These principles of physics allow for far more energy efficient AI. And to me, I see a huge upside where we get to solve a lot of the problems that plague us, rather than just thinking about just the risks and trying to kill a technology in the womb that will eventually exist one way or another. So I don't think I don't think there's anything that can really convince me to shut it all down.
I want to comment on it briefly. For one, I want to just highlight, I wasn't talking about shutting the technology down or anything like that, right? Okay, good. Then also, I like the lens that you take on those questions. It's like the complex adaptive system lens, right? On the world, and I agree with it. And there is the benefit of malleability, etc. But it's also a part of these systems to consider with how quickly other parts of the system can adapt to something growing, right? Like sometimes the information propagation doesn't work if one thing can't adapt in time. And frankly, right now the government is very slow at adapting to the technological change.
Let's speed it up, right?
I agree. Yeah. No, and I think that's why I like the lens so much, because I want to speed up the government's ability to make reasonable laws on it. But absent that, there is going to be a breakdown potentially of the system if you have too fast economic displacement, if you have too fast autonomous economies running. It's I want it all in the end. I just want
Can we get one
to
more?
have...
Just want to give the opportunity. We're out of time. We just have one question quick, and then we can break.
So here's my question. There is this underlying assumption in the AI safety debate, including, I think, in this panel, that accelerating is unsafe and decelerating is safe. And I'd like to ask the panelists what they think of the following alternative view, which is it's actually accelerating it's the other way around. Accelerating is safe and decelerating is unsafe, because what is dangerous today, the real clear and present danger, is stupid AI. Intelligent AI is safe. Stupid AI makes mistakes, and people with it make mistakes. So if you want safety, we should accelerate AI.
Well, now you kind of just made definitions. Sure, stupid AI is unsafe and intelligent AI is
No, this is not a
safe.
definition. I can put a lot of evidence behind this, but we don't have a lot of time.
No, I agree with you. Of course, stupid is bad. We are on the same page. but that's, I think, okay, here's a thing for everyone to ponder for a second. Forget P-doom. I think that's a bad framework, but what is your P-normal for any of the following years? What is your likelihood, in your mind, what's the likelihood that the world in 2034 didn't experience much more change than we have experienced in the 15 years prior? Or in 2044, that people from 2044 will look back at 2024 and say, oh man, the world's kind of roughly the same, as it has changed as much as 2024 to 2000. I think for me, anyone has different answers, but it's important to keep in mind, because for me, I think 2039 will look vastly, vastly different with autonomous economies. And do we need to speed that up to 2034 or 2029? It's really? This is where you get compounding dangers from people that are unhappy with the economic displacement because you didn't provide them an alternative thing, because the government is sluggish and didn't give them the social safety net.
Yeah, I would say, if we're kind of a late stage company here, and the executive team is not keeping up with the pace of innovation. So I think the solution is fire the executives and get some better ones in. And
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're also on the same page. Like, reduce the size of the government, and like that would be good because And in terms of speed, by the way, I would like to move at the speed such that we are ahead of China in speed, right? Like, but to win a race, you don't need to at all times accelerate. You just need to be ahead of the other guy.
Yeah, but it's not clear,
where they are. Sure.
Yeah.
We can find out.
All right.
I think we need to wrap it up, unfortunately.
Thank you so much.
But we can all chat.
Thanks.